The great hall of the Galactic Council stretched for miles in every direction. Thousands of alien beings filled the seats that rose in circles around the central speaking platform. The air buzzed with nervous energy as translators worked overtime to convert dozens of different languages into something everyone could understand. Today was the day they would decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador Jake Morrison stood alone at the center of it all. His dark blue uniform looked simple compared to the colorful robes and strange armor worn by the alien delegates around him. He kept his face calm even though his heart was beating fast. Behind him sat the small group of humans who had come to witness this historic moment. Captain Lisa Chun watched from the observation deck, her hands clenched tight as she waited for the vote that would change everything. High Counselor Zenthara rose from her crystal throne. Her body looked like it was made of living glass that caught the light and threw rainbows across the walls. When she spoke, her voice came through speakers placed throughout the massive chamber because her natural speech sounded like wind chimes. In a storm, "We gathered today to address the human problem," she began. Her words made several delegates nod their heads in agreement. For 200 years, humanity has been part of our galactic community. In that time, they have brought nothing but trouble and chaos to our peaceful way of life. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Ambassador Morrison felt his jaw tighten, but he said nothing. He had expected this. Counselor Vextai of the Insectoid Collective clicked his mandibles together as he stood. His 6 arms gestured wildly as he spoke. Humans wage war over the smallest disagreements. They expand into new territories without asking permission. They solve problems with violence when the rest of us prefer to talk things through. They are too dangerous to remain in civilized space. More voices joined in from around the chamber. The Etherian Collective complained about human military bases being too close to their meditation worlds. The Aquatic Federation said human ships made too much noise when they traveled through their space routes. The Molten Hegemony claimed that humans stole their mining rights in 3 different star systems. Ambassador Morrison listened to each complaint with growing frustration. Most of what they said was either completely wrong or taken out of context. The mining rights dispute had been settled through proper legal channels 2 years ago. The military bases were built to protect trade routes from pirates. The noise complaints were about emergency medical ships rushing to help alien colonists during a plague outbreak. "The evidence is clear," announced Speaker Krellmuth, whose job it was to keep order during council meetings. "Humanity has proven, time and again, that they cannot exist peacefully alongside other species. They are too aggressive, too unpredictable, too willing to use force when patience would serve better." Captain Chun leaned forward in her seat. She had fought alongside many of these same aliens during the border wars 20 years ago. Human ships had saved entire alien colonies from destruction. Human soldiers had died protecting alien civilians. Now, those same aliens were calling her people too violent to live among them. The vote began with the smallest species first. The crystalline communes voted to expel humanity. The gas giant collective did the same. One by one, each alien species cast their vote against the humans. Some delegates looked sad about it, but they voted to expel anyway. Others seemed happy to finally get rid of what they saw as a problem. Ambassador Morrison finally spoke when given the chance. His voice carried across the huge chamber without any help from the speaker system. "You are making the biggest mistake in galactic history," he said simply. "Humanity has spent 2 centuries helping to keep this galaxy safe and peaceful. We have fought wars you were afraid to fight. We have explored dangerous regions you avoided. We have made first contact with hostile species and turned them into allies." He paused and looked around at the thousands of alien faces staring down at him. "You think we are too violent, but you forget that sometimes violence is the only thing that stops greater violence. You think we are too aggressive, but you forget that our aggression has always been aimed at protecting those who cannot protect themselves." High Counselor Zenthara crystal body flashed with bright colors. "Your words prove our point, Ambassador. You see violence as a solution. We see it as a problem. The vote is unanimous. Humanity is hereby expelled from galactic council space. You have 60 standard cycles to remove all human presence from beyond the quarantine boundary. The chamber erupted in cheers from some species and uncomfortable silence from others. Ambassador Morrison felt the weight of failure settle on his shoulders. 200 years of cooperation and friendship ended in a single afternoon. As the human delegation prepared to leave, a voice spoke from the upper galleries where few beings ever sat. Elder Morden of the ancient keeper species rose slowly from his seat. He was old beyond counting, his species having traveled the galaxy since before most of the other races had learned to build fire. When he spoke, his thoughts entered every mind in the chamber directly. "I abstained from this vote," his mental voice said. "Not because I support humanity, but because I have lived long enough to see what happens when apex predators are removed from an ecosystem." The chamber fell completely silent. Elder Morden almost never spoke during council sessions. When he did, everyone listened. "You have all made a choice today that will echo through history," he continued. "You have decided that safety is more important than the guardians who provide that safety. You have chosen comfort over the uncomfortable truth that sometimes the sheep need wolves to protect them from worse wolves." His ancient eyes focused on each section of the assembly in turn. "Remember this day well. Remember the choice you made. When the consequences of this decision arrive at your doorstep, do not say you were not warned." With that, Elder Morden sat back down and said nothing more. The human delegation left the chamber in silence, walking past thousands of aliens who refused to meet their eyes. Some looked ashamed, others looked relieved. None of them looked prepared for what was coming. Ambassador Morrison paused at the great doors of the chamber and turned back one last time. "Elder Morden is right," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You will remember this day. And when you do, you will wish you had made a different choice." The doors closed behind the humans with a sound like thunder. The expulsion was complete. Humanity had 60 days to leave the galaxy they had called home for 2 centuries. What happened next would depend on whether the galaxy could survive without its most dangerous protectors. 6 months after the vote that changed everything, the great human exodus was almost complete. Admiral Ben Carter stood on the bridge of the UES Independence, watching as the last civilian transports cleared the Proxima relay stations. The massive ship hummed with activity as thousands of crew members worked around the clock to coordinate the largest evacuation in galactic history. The Independence was more than just a ship. It was a floating city, home to over 2 million people during normal operations. Today, it served as the command center for Operation Homecoming, the military codename for humanity's withdrawal from council space. Every screen on the bridge showed different parts of the evacuation. Transport ships loaded with families, cargo haulers carrying the machinery from abandoned factories, military escorts making sure everyone got out safely. "Status report, Commander," Admiral Carter said to his aide, Commander Grace Palmer. She was a short woman with gray hair who had been managing impossible logistics problems for 30 years. If anyone could make this evacuation work, it was Grace Palmer. "Sir, we have successfully evacuated 93% of all human colonies and installations," she reported while checking her datapad. "The mining operations in the Kepler sector are being shut down right now. Captain Ryan Mitchell says the last civilian ships have left the Proxima stations. We are ahead of schedule." Admiral Carter nodded but did not look happy. Being ahead of schedule was good news, but what they were losing was heartbreaking. Humanity was giving up not just territory but centuries of hard work. Cities they had built from nothing, farms that had fed billions of people, research stations where they had made discoveries that helped the whole galaxy. The economic cost was enormous, but the human government had decided that cooperation was better than war. On the agricultural world of New Kansas, Farmer Pete Johnson was watching the last harvest being loaded onto evacuation ships. His family had worked this land for 3 generations. When they first arrived, New Kansas was just a rock floating in space with no atmosphere and no life. Now it had green fields that stretched to the horizon and cities full of happy families. All of that was being left behind. This is not right. Dad, said his daughter Amy. She was 22 years old and had never lived anywhere else. Tears ran down her face as she looked across the fields they were abandoning. Why should we have to leave? We built all of this with our own hands. Pete Johnson was a big man with hands made tough by decades of farm work. He put one of those hands on his daughter's shoulder and tried to comfort her. No, sweetheart, it is not right, he agreed. But sometimes you have to know when to walk away from a fight. It does not mean we will not be back someday. It just means today is not the day for fighting. Amy wiped her eyes and looked at her father. Do you really think we will come back? Pete looked out over the fields one more time. In the distance, he could see smoke rising from the grain processing plants as they were shut down and dismantled. Everything valuable was being packed up and taken away. Everything too heavy to move was being destroyed so the aliens could not use it. I think the aliens are making a big mistake, he said finally. They think they can have all the good things about living with humans without any of the difficult parts. But life does not work that way. They are going to learn that lesson the hard way. As the human fleets gathered at the quarantine boundary, something unexpected happened. Ships appeared from the deep space between stars. They were ancient vessels that looked like they had been traveling for thousands of years. The ships belonged to the Keeper species, the oldest race in the galaxy. The Keepers rarely involved themselves in the affairs of younger species. But today was different. Elder Morden's ship, a massive vessel that was part spaceship and part temple, approached the Independence directly. Admiral Carter received a communication request immediately. Admiral Carter, the Elder's mental voice spoke directly into his mind. I offer a safe passage through Keeper territories to the Galactic Rim. It is the least we can do. Admiral Carter was surprised. The Keepers had not spoken to humanity in over 50 years. Elder Morden, we appreciate the offer, but why are you helping us? The ancient being was quiet for a long moment. When he finally answered, his thoughts carried a weight that made Admiral Carter's spine tingle with worry. Because I have seen this before, Admiral. Many times across many galaxies. When a civilization decides it no longer needs its apex predators, the apex predators do not simply disappear. They adapt, they grow stronger. They prepare for the day when they will be needed again, whether the civilization wants them or not. Admiral Carter felt a chill run through him. What exactly are you saying, Elder? What is coming will be remembered. As the day the galaxy learned why apex predators should never be cornered, Elder Morden replied. Your species will survive this exile, Admiral. You will grow stronger because of it. But when you return, you will not be the same humans who left. The Keeper ships formed an escort around the human fleet as they began their journey to the Galactic Rim. It was a region of space that most species avoided because it was far from trade routes and had few valuable resources. For humanity, it would become home during the long journey. Admiral Carter received regular reports from his captains. The mood among the evacuees was mixed. Some people were angry about being forced to leave. Others were sad about losing their homes. But a surprising number seemed almost excited about the challenge of building something new. Captain Danny Cooper commanded one of the escort destroyers protecting the civilian transports. He had fought in 3 different wars defending alien colonies from pirates and hostile species. Now those same aliens had voted to kick humanity out of the galaxy. Admiral, he reported during one of their regular communication sessions, the mood on my ship is interesting. The crew is not as upset as I expected them to be. Chief Engineer Betty Collins says her people are already making plans for new ship designs. Lieutenant Gary Stevens thinks we can build better colonies in the Rim than anything we left behind. Admiral Carter was not surprised. Humans had always been good at making the best of bad situations. It was one of the things that made them such good allies and such dangerous enemies. As the fleet approached the Galactic Rim, long-range sensors began picking up strange readings. The region was not as empty as everyone had thought. There were signs of ancient structures floating in the void between stars. Some of them were massive beyond comprehension. Sir, reported Commander Palmer, The science teams are very excited about what they are finding out here. Dr. Helen Wright says some of these structures might be older than the galaxy itself. Admiral Carter studied the sensor readings on his main screen. Whatever was out there, it was big enough to change everything humanity thought they knew about the universe. "Commander, send a message to all ships," he ordered. "We are not just evacuating anymore, we are exploring. This is not the end of humanity's story in this galaxy. This is the beginning of a new chapter." As the human fleet settled into their new home at the edge of everything, they began to discover that exile might be the best thing that had ever happened to them. The galaxy had forced them to leave, thinking it would make everyone safer. What they did not know was that they had just given humanity the time and space they needed to become something the galaxy had never seen before. Elder Morden's final message to Admiral Carter was brief but prophetic. "Admiral, your people have 60 years before the real test comes. Use that time wisely. The galaxy will need you again, but when that day arrives, make sure you are ready to dictate the terms." 2 years had passed since humanity disappeared beyond the quarantine boundary, and the galaxy seemed to have found its new normal. The Great Council chambers buzzed with the usual mix of political discussions and trade negotiations. Most of the alien species had convinced themselves that expelling the humans was the smartest decision they had ever made. Counselor Heshra of the Etherian Collective stood at the central podium, her ghostly form flickering slightly as she presented the quarterly stability report. Her people were energy beings who lived in the space between stars, and they prided themselves on seeing the big picture that other species missed. "Esteemed colleagues," she began, her voice like music played through crystal, "I am pleased to report that peace has returned to our galaxy. Crime in former human territories has decreased by 47%. Resource conflicts have diminished significantly. Trade disputes are being resolved through proper diplomatic channels rather than the threat of human military intervention." The assembled delegates murmured their approval. High Counselor Zenthara's crystal body flashed with satisfied colors. Counselor Vextai clicked his mandibles together in what passed for applause among his insect-like people. Furthermore, Counselor Heshra continued, "Piracy has decreased in most sectors. The aggressive expansion that characterized human colonization has ended, allowing other species to settle previously contested worlds in an orderly fashion. Our decision appears to have been completely vindicated." But not everyone in the chamber shared this optimism. Dr. Corthell, the galaxy's leading expert on predator species behavior, rose from his seat in the observer section. He was a member of the scholarly caste, beings who devoted their lives to studying and understanding the complex relationships between different species. His people rarely spoke during council sessions unless they had something very important to say. "Esteemed counselors," Dr. Corthell said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems, "I request permission to address the assembly regarding my concerns about our current trajectory." Speaker Krelmoff looked annoyed at the interruption. "Doctor, you are not scheduled to speak today. These sessions are for official council business only." "What I have to say is official council business," Dr. Corthell replied firmly. "My research indicates that humanity's role in galactic society was far more complex than simple aggression. I believe we may have made a serious error in judgment." The chamber fell silent. Questioning the council's decisions was not something that happened often, especially not in public sessions that were broadcast across the galaxy. High Counselor Xanthora's colors shifted to deep reds and oranges, indicating displeasure. "Explain yourself, Doctor. What exactly are you claiming?" Dr. Corthell activated a holographic display that showed statistical data from across the galaxy. Charts and graphs filled the air above the central podium, displaying information that most of the delegates had never seen before. "Humans did not just wage war," he began. "They ended wars that would have continued for decades without their intervention. Their reputation for decisive action prevented countless conflicts from escalating into full-scale galactic disasters. They were not just warriors, they were peacekeepers in the truest sense. The holographic display shifted to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red areas indicated regions of conflict or instability. Before humanity's expulsion, most of the galaxy was colored green for peaceful. Now, much more of it was yellow for unstable or red for active conflict. "Look at these numbers," Dr. Corthell continued. "Piracy has not decreased overall. It has simply moved to areas where human patrols no longer operate. Small conflicts that humans would have stopped before they grew serious are now turning into major wars. The Kornak Rebellion in Sector 7 has been going on for 18 months. Before expulsion, human mediators would have ended it in weeks." Counselor Vextai waved his chitinous arms dismissively. "Those are minor problems compared to the chaos that humans brought with them wherever they went. A few small conflicts are a reasonable price to pay for galactic stability." Dr. Corthell's display changed again, showing long-range sensor data from the galactic rim. The readings were incomplete, but they showed massive industrial activity in the region where humanity had been exiled. "There is something else, counselors. I have been monitoring the quarantine boundary using deep space sensor arrays. The level of construction activity in the galactic rim is unprecedented. The humans are not simply building new colonies. They are engaged in industrial projects on a scale that defies comprehension." The display showed energy readings that made several delegates gasp in surprise. Whatever humanity was building out there required more power than most star systems produce naturally. "Furthermore," Dr. Corthell continued, "my analysis of human behavior patterns suggests that exile will not make them less dangerous. Predator. Species respond to isolation by becoming more efficient, more focused, and more deadly. We have not eliminated a threat, we have given it time to evolve." Counselor Heshra's ethereal form brightened with skepticism. "Doctor, you are engaging in wild speculation. The humans are gone, they are no longer our concern. Whatever they build in the empty void beyond the rim cannot possibly affect us here in the civilized core of the galaxy. That is exactly the kind of thinking that leads to catastrophic mistakes," Dr. Corthell replied. "We assume that distance equals safety. We assume that exile equals defeat. But predator species do not think like prey species. They think in terms of adaptation and eventual return." Before anyone could respond, the chamber's lighting dimmed slightly. This was the signal that Elder Morden wished to speak. The ancient keeper rarely communicated during council sessions, but when he did, protocol required that everyone listen. Elder Morden's mental voice reached every mind in the chamber simultaneously. "Dr. Corthell speaks wisdom that you would be wise to heed." The silence was absolute. Even the translation system stopped their quiet humming as every being in the chamber focused on the elder's words. "I have traveled to the galactic rim recently," Elder Morden continued. "What humanity builds there will reshape the balance of power in this galaxy forever. They have found things in the deep void that you cannot imagine. Ancient structures, forgotten technologies. Knowledge that has been waiting in the darkness for species wise enough to claim it." High Counselor Zenthara's crystal body flashed with nervous colors. "Elder, surely you are not suggesting that the humans pose a threat to council authority." "I am suggesting nothing," Elder Morden replied. "I am stating a fact. The humans you expelled as too dangerous have become something far more dangerous. In exile, they have had 2 years to plan, to build, and to prepare. When they return, and they will return, it will not be a supplicant seeking readmission to your council." The chamber erupted in nervous chatter as delegates discussed this revelation with their advisors. Several species demanded more information about what Elder Morden had seen in the Rim territories. "Elder," called out Counselor Vextai, "if the humans truly pose a threat, should we not take preemptive action to protect ourselves?" Elder Morden's mental laughter was like cold wind through empty space. "Counselor, you still do not understand what you are dealing with. The humans you could have taken action against are gone. What has replaced them is beyond your ability to challenge. You were warned before the expulsion vote. You chose to ignore that warning. Now you must live with the consequences." Dr. Corthell cleared his throat. Esteemed counselors, I strongly recommend that we establish a monitoring station near the quarantine boundary. We need to understand what humanity is becoming out there. Absolutely not, declared Speaker Krellmuth. The quarantine boundary exists for our protection. We will not violate it simply to satisfy scientific curiosity about our former problems. Elder Morden spoke one final time before his presence faded from the chamber. You have made your choices and you will live with them. But remember this day when the consequences arrive. Remember that you were offered wisdom and chose ignorance instead. As the council session ended, delegates filed out of the chamber with mixed feelings. Some were confident that they had made the right decision and that the humans were no longer a concern. Others worried about what Dr. Corthell and Elder Morden had revealed. In the weeks that followed, several species quietly began strengthening their border defenses and updating their military protocols. They told themselves it was routine maintenance, but deep down they knew they were preparing for something they could not yet understand. The galaxy had chosen to ignore the warnings about cornering apex predators. Soon they would learn whether that choice had been wisdom or folly. In the deep void beyond the rim, humanity continued building something that would change everything. The only question was whether the galaxy would be ready when that something finally revealed itself. 4 years after humanity's expulsion from Council space, the galaxy's comfortable illusion of safety shattered in a single moment. The first sign of trouble came from the deep space monitoring stations positioned at the galaxy's edge, where ancient automated sensors had watched the void between galaxies for millions of years without detecting anything significant. On a quiet morning in the primary monitoring facility on Station Alpha 7, Technician Creven was performing routine maintenance when every alarm in the complex began screaming at once. The insectoid being's compound eyes went wide as massive energy signatures appeared on sensors that had been silent for millennia. Supervisor, Craven called out in panic, you need to see this immediately. Supervisor Haltrick rushed to the monitoring station and looked at readings that should have been impossible. Something enormous was approaching from the void between galaxies, moving at speeds that violated several known laws of physics. Before either of them could process what they were seeing, every communication device in the galaxy activated simultaneously. The emergency broadcast system, personal communicators, military channels, even children's toys with speakers began transmitting the same message in perfect clarity. We are the Devourers, the voice said without any accent or emotion. Your galaxy is rich with life energy that we require for our continued existence. We will harvest it all. Resistance is irrelevant. Surrender is meaningless. You exist now only to feed us. The transmission ended as suddenly as it had begun, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the vacuum of space itself. Within minutes, long-range sensors detected the first wave of vessels entering the galaxy's outer rim. They were massive, beyond comprehension, each one the size of a small moon, and they moved with purpose toward the nearest populated systems. The outer colony of Kepler 442b was among the first to encounter the invaders. Colony Administrator Janet Price was reviewing quarterly production reports when the sky above New Birmingham turned black with alien ships. The structures were unlike anything in galactic records. They seemed to absorb light itself, creating holes in space where stars should have been visible. Emergency Council, this is Administrator Price. She broadcast on the emergency frequency. Unknown vessels have appeared in our system. They are not responding to communication attempts and appear to be deploying some kind of harvesting equipment toward our sun. The response from Colonial Command was immediate but useless. Administrator Price, maintain defensive positions and await Council fleet reinforcements. What happened next redefined the word horror for every species in the galaxy. The Devourer ships did not attack the colony directly. Instead, they surrounded the system star and began drawing energy from it using technology that turned stellar matter into a stream of pure power. As the star dimmed, every living thing on Kepler 442b began to weaken and die. The aliens were Not just harvesting solar energy, they were harvesting the life force that depended on that energy. Within 6 hours, 2 million colonists were dead. Within 12 hours, the star itself went dark. The Devourer fleet moved on to the next system, leaving behind nothing but a cold rock floating in empty space. Similar reports flooded in from across the outer rim. The Vorthen research station at Proxima Relay went silent after transmitting. Footage of their personnel collapsing as invisible energy was drained from their bodies. The mining colony on Asteroid Base 7 managed to evacuate 3 ships before the Devourers arrived, but the refugees died during transit as some unknown force pulled the life out of them even in hyperspace. In the emergency council session that followed, panic replaced the usual diplomatic composure. Species that had maintained careful neutrality for centuries suddenly found themselves begging former enemies for alliance and protection. "We need to recall the humans immediately," declared Counselor Heshra, her ethereal form flickering frantically with distress. "Whatever differences we had with them, we need their military capabilities now." Their fleets were always the most advanced in the galaxy. Admiral Vextai of the Insectoid Defense Fleet clicked his mandibles in agreement. Human tactical doctrines were the most effective against unknown threats. Their warships were designed for scenarios that other species never imagined. We made a terrible mistake in expelling them. High Counselor Zenthara S. crystal body pulsed with colors that indicated extreme stress. All agreed then. "Activate the emergency communication array and send a message to the quarantine boundary immediately." The message was broadcast on every frequency known to work across galactic distances, to humanity and all human military forces. The Galactic Council formally requests immediate military assistance against an extragalactic threat of unprecedented scale. All previous sanctions, restrictions, and expulsion orders are hereby permanently rescinded. Please respond with all possible speed. For 12 agonizing hours, there was no response. Council delegates began to fear that humanity had moved beyond communication range or had simply chosen to ignore their former persecutors. Some worried that the Devourers had already found and destroyed the human settlements in the Rim territories. Then, at exactly noon Galactic Standard Time, a response arrived on the same frequency, but it did not come from where anyone expected. "This is Admiral Jake Morrison, commanding the 1st Human Defense Fleet," the transmission began. Several council members recognized the name. He had been Ambassador Morrison during the expulsion hearings 4 years earlier. "Council members," Admiral Morrison continued, "you expelled us from civilized space because you considered us too dangerous, too aggressive, and too unpredictable. You wanted peace and stability without the inconvenience of dealing with apex predators. You got exactly what you asked for." The transmission paused, and when it resumed, the Admiral's voice carried a weight that made even the most arrogant delegates pay attention. "What you did not know is that humanity has encountered the Devourers before in another galaxy entirely. We have been preparing for their eventual arrival for over 3 centuries. Our ancestors barely escaped their last feeding, and they spent their remaining years making sure their descendants would be ready." Stunned silence filled the council chamber as the implications became clear. Humanity had not just been unlucky enough to encounter this threat by coincidence, they had been expecting it. "The Devourers have consumed 17 galaxies that we know of," Admiral Morrison continued. "Each time the civilized species tried diplomacy first, they tried negotiation. They tried economic incentives and cultural exchanges. They tried everything except what actually works against entities that view consciousness itself as food." The transmission included tactical data that made the Council's military experts gasp in horror. The Devourers did not just destroy civilizations. They converted destroyed matter into raw materials for their own ships and weapons. Every successful defense became the foundation for their next attack. "We built our new fleet specifically to fight an enemy that grows stronger from every victory," Admiral Morrison explained. "We designed weapon systems that can crack planets and sterilize entire star systems. We created military doctrines based on the simple principle that when facing an enemy that feeds on life itself, Mercy is not just useless, it is actively harmful. High Counselor Zenthara managed to find her voice. Admiral Morrison, we understand that we made an error in expelling humanity. We are prepared to offer full reinstatement to Council membership with enhanced privileges and territorial grants. What are your terms for military assistance? Admiral Morrison's response would be remembered by every species in the galaxy for the rest of their existence. Counselor, you seem to think this is a negotiation. It is not. The Devourers are not interested in your politics, your trade agreements, or your diplomatic protocols. They are interested in converting every living thing in this galaxy into energy for their continued expansion across the universe. The transmission paused again, and when it resumed, there was something different in the Admiral's voice. Something that made predator species instincts wake up in beings that had forgotten they were once prey. Humanity will engage the Devourers because that is what we do. We hunt the things that hunt others, but we will do it on our terms, using our methods without interference from species that spent 4 years convincing themselves they were safer without us. The communication ended with coordinates for a meeting point near the quarantine boundary and a simple message. Any Council forces that wish to assist will follow human command protocols without question. Any forces that cannot accept those terms should stay home and prepare for whatever survives our engagement. As the transmission ended, Elder Morden's presence filled the chamber one final time. You were warned, his mental voice whispered to every mind present. The apex predators. You feared have returned, but they are no longer the same species you expelled. What approaches from the rim will save you all, but the price of that salvation will be accepting that some problems can only be solved through absolute, uncompromising violence. The galaxy had ignored every warning about the consequences of cornering humanity. Now they would discover what those consequences truly meant. The human fleet that emerged from the quarantine boundary looked nothing like the vessels that had departed 4 years earlier. Where the old ships had been sleek and diplomatic, these new warships were angular and brutal, designed for one purpose. Only they bristled with weapon systems that seemed to bend space around them, and their hulls were made from materials that absorbed sensor scans like black holes swallowing light. The head of this terrifying armada flew the UES Retribution, Admiral Morrison's flagship. The massive vessel was the size of a small moon, its surface covered with weapons that most alien scientists could not even identify. When it moved, space itself seemed to ripple around its engines. Captain Danny Cooper stood on the bridge of the destroyer Phoenix, watching alien fleet formations trying to coordinate with human vessels through the main display. The alien ships looked like toys next to the human warships, and their crews were clearly struggling to understand the tactical doctrines humanity had developed during their exile. Sir, Cooper reported to Admiral Morrison over the communication link, the Council fleets are requesting tactical integration protocols. They want to know how their ships can best support our operations against the Devourers. Admiral Morrison studied the holographic display showing Devourer forces advancing through 3 different sectors simultaneously. Their technology was indeed beyond anything the galaxy had faced before. Ships that could phase through solid matter, weapons that consumed energy itself and turned it against their targets, and worst of all, they were learning and adapting to every defensive strategy the Council forces attempted. Negative, Captain, Admiral Morrison replied. Council species will serve as diversion and support only. Primary engagement protocols remain human exclusive. They are not equipped for the kind of warfare this requires. Commander Elena Rodriguez, Morrison's tactical officer, looked up from her console with a concerned expression. Admiral, the Vorthak are requesting detailed explanations of our engagement strategy. They keep asking why we will not share our new weapon technologies with them. Admiral Morrison's face hardened. Because they still do not understand what they are facing, Commander. They think this is another territorial dispute that can be resolved through superior firepower and clever tactics. The Devourers do not care about territory or resources. They care about consumption. Every ship they destroy, every world they harvest, makes them stronger for the next engagement. The first major battle occurred in the Centauri sector, where a massive Council defense fleet of over 3,000 vessels had attempted to stop a Devourer advance using traditional military tactics. The engagement lasted exactly 6 minutes. The Devourers converted the destroyed ships into raw materials for their own forces and continued their advance without even slowing down. Admiral Morrison activated fleet-wide communications to address every human vessel in the Armada. All ships execute Protocol Omega immediately. This is not a battle for territory, resources, or political advantage. This is species survival on a galactic scale. Engagement rules are simple: no prisoners, no mercy, no retreat. If we fall back, they consume what we leave behind and become stronger. The human fleet moved with precision that stunned their alien observers. Instead of traditional formations, they operated in small, highly mobile units that struck with devastating force before disappearing into hyperspace. Their weapons did not just destroy Devourer vessels, they completely annihilated them at the molecular level, preventing any salvage or absorption of materials. Captain Linda Shaw commanded the cruiser Vengeance and was coordinating with ground forces on the embattled world of New Olympia. The planet's 2 billion inhabitants were trapped as Devourer harvesting platforms began draining energy from the system's star. "Ground control, this is Captain Shaw," she transmitted. "Beginning atmospheric bombardment of Devourer harvesting platforms. Recommend immediate civilian evacuation to designated safe zones." "Captain Shaw, this is General Steve Parker," came the reply from the planet's surface. "Civilian evacuation is complete, but we have a serious problem. The Devourers are adapting to our weapons faster than our projections indicated. They are beginning to shrug off our antimatter charges like they were conventional explosives." Admiral Morrison had anticipated this development. The Devourers' ability to learn and adapt was their greatest strength, but it was also predictable. "All ships implement Contingency Plan Alpha immediately. Deploy the gravitational torpedoes." What happened next defied the understanding of every alien species present. The human weapons did not just destroy the Devourer vessels, they created controlled black holes that consumed everything within a 50-kilometer radius before collapsing harmlessly according to carefully calculated physics. It was weaponized. Science on a scale that the galaxy had never imagined possible. Elder Morden's ancient vessel approached the Retribution as the tide of battle began to turn. His telepathic message reached Admiral Morrison directly, bypassing all communication systems. "Admiral," the Elder's mental voice carried undertones of both respect and concern, "your species has indeed learned harsh lessons during your exile. The weapons you wield now could destroy entire worlds if you chose to use them that way." Admiral Morrison's response was grim but determined. "Elder, these weapons will destroy worlds if that becomes necessary. The Devourers leave us no choice in this matter. Either we use every tool at our disposal, or every living thing in this galaxy becomes food for entities that view consciousness itself as a delicacy to be consumed." The final battle occurred at the galactic core, where the main Devourer fleet had attempted to tap directly into the supermassive black hole for energy. If they succeeded, they would have enough power to consume the entire galaxy in a matter of weeks. The human fleet, now supported by what remained of the Council forces, engaged in a conflict that temporarily rewrote the laws of physics in the local region. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the Retribution as reality bent around the massive engagement. Space itself was being torn apart and rebuilt as human weapons clashed with Devourer technology. Stars flickered and died, then reignited as gravitational fields shifted unpredictably. "Sir," reported Commander Rodriguez, "we are receiving surrender offers from the remaining Devourer forces. They claim they are willing to negotiate a withdrawal from this galaxy." "Denied," Admiral Morrison replied without hesitation. "Continue firing until every last trace is eliminated. They do not surrender, they regroup and return stronger. This ends here, today, permanently." When silence finally fell across the galaxy, The survivors found themselves in a fundamentally changed universe. The human fleet, battered but victorious, held position at the galactic core while the Council species surveyed the devastation that had saved them all. Hi, Counselor Xanthara S. Message to the human fleet carried implications that would reshape galactic politics forever. Admiral Morrison, the Galactic Council formally acknowledges that our expulsion of humanity was a catastrophic error in judgment. We offer immediate reinstatement to full Council membership with enhanced privileges and territorial grants. Admiral Morrison's response would be studied by political scientists for millennia afterward. Counselor, you expelled us because you feared our capacity for violence. You were absolutely right to fear it. We are apex predators, and we do what apex predators do. We hunt the things that hunt others. You wanted safety without acknowledging the true cost of safety. Now you know exactly what that cost is. He paused, allowing his words to reach every communication system in Council space. Humanity will not be returning to Council space under the old terms or any terms you might offer. We have learned to survive and thrive without you, and we have built something stronger in isolation. However, we will maintain defense agreements with any species that acknowledges a simple truth. Sometimes civilization requires the threat of absolute destruction to protect it from actual annihilation. The galaxy was forever changed by what became known as the Devourer War. Humanity established new territories in the former battle zones, creating a buffer between Council space and the dark void beyond. They became the galaxy's guardians, watching for threats that civilized species could not imagine and preparing for conflicts that others hoped would never come. Years later, when young alien scholars studied the war in their history classes, they learned a fundamental lesson about apex predators. They do not exist just to destroy. They also exist to protect. But protection always comes with a price, and that price is the constant readiness to do what others cannot or will not do when survival is at stake. Elder Morden's final recorded statement summarized the new reality that every species had to accept. The galaxy learned that apex predators are dangerous to have around, but removing them entirely is far more dangerous. What protects the sheep when the wolves are gone? Hungrier wolves, crueler wolves, wolves that see mercy as weakness and kindness as opportunity. Humanity was our immune system, and we nearly died when we cast it out. This mistake will never be made again.